They shoved the human into the mud pit. The cubs leapt in and guided her back to solid ground. The transport ship landed on Velcor Prime with a grinding noise that made Dr. Sarah Chen grip her seat harder. She was the first human to ever set foot on this planet. The Velcorians had finally agreed to let one human scientist visit their world. They wanted to study her just as much as she wanted to study them. Sarah stepped out of the ship and felt the heavy air press against her skin. The sky was orange, and thick clouds moved slowly above her head. The ground beneath her boots was soft and dark. Everything smelled like wet earth and something sweet she could not name. A group of Velcorians waited for her near the landing zone. They stood on 4 powerful legs, and their bodies were covered in thick gray fur. Their faces had flat snouts and golden eyes that watched her every move. They were taller than her by at least 2 feet, and their shoulders were broad and muscular. Sarah knew from her research that these beings valued strength above all things. They believed that the weak did not deserve respect. The leader of the group stepped forward. His name was Tharn, and he wore metal bands around his front legs to show his rank. He looked at Sarah with something between curiosity and disgust. "So this is the human," Tharn said in the common galactic language. "Smaller than I expected, weaker too." Sarah kept her expression calm. She had trained for months to prepare for this moment. She knew the Velcorians would test her. They tested everyone who came to their world. "I am Dr. Sarah Chen," she said clearly. "I am grateful for the chance to visit your planet and learn about your people." Tharn made a sound that might have been a laugh. The other Velcorians behind him joined in. Their golden eyes seemed to glow brighter with amusement. "Learn about us," Tharn repeated. "What could a soft creature like you possibly understand about our ways?" Sarah did not answer. She simply waited. She had learned that silence was sometimes the best response when dealing with beings who wanted to make her angry. Tharn turned and began walking toward the settlement in the distance. The other Velcorians followed him, and Sarah walked behind them. She noticed that none of them offered to help her carry her equipment bag. She did not expect them to. The path to the settlement was long and difficult. It wound through thick forests and across rocky hills. Sarah's legs began to burn after the first hour, but she did not complain. She kept pace with the Velcorians, even though they walked faster than was comfortable for her. As they traveled, Sarah noticed smaller shapes moving through the trees beside them. She caught glimpses of young Velcorians watching from behind thick trunks and low branches. The cubs were curious about her. Their eyes were wider than the adults, and they had not yet learned to hide their emotions. One small cub moved too close to the path, and Tharn growled at it sharply. The little creature ran back into the forest with a frightened yelp. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy in her chest, but she said nothing. They reached the settlement as the orange sun began to set. The buildings were made of stone and wood, and they rose up from the ground like natural formations. Everything here seemed to grow from the earth itself. Sarah thought it was beautiful in a wild and untamed way. Tharn led her to a large open area in the center of the settlement. Many Velcorians had gathered there to see the human visitor. They formed a circle around Sarah and stared at her with their glowing golden eyes. She felt like an animal in a cage at a zoo. "The human will stay in the outer quarters," Tharn announced to the crowd. "She is here to observe us. We will observe her as well." A female Velcorian stepped forward from the crowd. She was older than the others, and her gray fur had turned white around her muzzle. She looked at Sarah with less hostility than the others. "The council has agreed to this visit," the old female said, "but many of us are not happy about it. Humans are unknown to us." "We do not trust unknown things." Sarah nodded respectfully. "I understand your concerns. I hope that my time here will help build trust between our peoples." The old female made a humming sound and stepped back into the crowd. Tharn gestured for Sarah to follow him toward the outer edge of the settlement. As they walked, Sarah noticed a large pit filled with dark brown mud. It sat between the main settlement and the outer quarters where she would be staying. "That is the training pit," Tharn said when he saw her looking. "Our warriors use it to practice fighting in difficult conditions. It is deep and the mud is thick. Many have drowned in it when they were not careful." Sarah looked at the pit and felt a chill run down her spine. The surface of the mud was still and dark, like a pool of old blood. She could not see the bottom. The days that followed were difficult for Sarah. The Velkorians watched her constantly but rarely spoke to her. They seemed to be waiting for something. She did not know what they expected from her, but she continued her research quietly and without complaint. The cubs were different from the adults. They followed Sarah whenever she walked through the settlement. They hid behind buildings and peeked at her from around corners. Sometimes she would leave small treats from her rations near their hiding spots. She never looked at them directly when she did this. She knew that would scare them away. One morning, a small female cub found the courage to approach Sarah while she was collecting soil samples near the edge of the forest. The cub was tiny compared to the adults, and her fur was softer and lighter in color. Her golden eyes were full of wonder. "What are you doing?" the cub asked in a small voice. Sarah smiled gently. "I am studying the dirt. I want to learn what makes it special." The cub tilted her head to one side. "The dirt is special?" "Everything is special if you look at it the right way," Sarah said. The cub seemed to think about this for a moment. Then she ran away quickly, as if she had done something forbidden. Sarah watched her go and felt warmth spread through her chest. She had always loved children no matter what species they belonged to. As the weeks passed, more cubs began to approach Sarah openly. She learned their names and listened to their stories. She taught them simple human games, and they taught her how to find the sweetest berries in the forest. The adults watched these interactions with disapproval, but they did not stop them. Tharn grew more hostile towards Sarah as the days went on. He did not like how the cubs followed her around. He did not like how she smiled at them or how she treated them as equals. In Velkorian society, cubs were meant to be silent until they proved their worth. Sarah treated them like they already had worth, just by existing. One evening, Tharn confronted Sarah as she walked back to her quarters. Several other warriors stood behind him. Their expressions were dark and angry. "You are corrupting our young," Tharn said through clenched teeth. "You are filling their heads with soft human ideas." Sarah stood her ground. "I have only shown them kindness. Is that so dangerous?" Tharn stepped closer to her. His hot breath washed over her face. "Kindness makes them weak. The weak do not survive on Velkor Prime." Before Sarah could respond, Tharn grabbed her with his powerful front legs and lifted her off the ground. She struggled, but his grip was too strong. The other warriors laughed as Tharn carried her toward the training pit. "Let us see how the human survives our mud," Tharn growled. He threw Sarah into the pit without warning. She hit the surface of the mud hard and immediately began to sink. The thick brown substance pulled at her legs and arms like hungry hands. She tried to swim, but the mud was too heavy. It sucked at her body and dragged her down. Sarah fought with everything she had. She kicked and thrashed, but the mud only pulled harder. The cold darkness crept up past her waist and then her chest. She could hear the Velkorians laughing above her. They were watching her drown and they were enjoying it. Then she heard something else. Small voices crying out in alarm, tiny splashes as small bodies hit the mud around her. The cubs had jumped into the pit. Sarah felt small paws grab her arms and legs. The cubs were swimming through the mud with natural skill that their species possessed from birth. They pulled at Sarah and pushed her toward the edge of the pit. Their small bodies worked together like a single machine. "This way," the small female cub called out. "Follow us. We know the safe path." Sarah let the cubs guide her through the thick mud. They knew where the ground was solid beneath the surface. They led her around the deepest parts and pulled her toward safety. It took many long minutes, but finally Sarah felt solid ground beneath her feet. She crawled out of the pit, covered in mud, but alive. The cubs climbed out after her. They were covered in mud too, and their fur was matted and dirty, but their eyes were bright with pride. The settlement had gone silent. Every adult Velcorian stood frozen in shock. No one had expected this. Cubs never disobeyed adults. Cubs never risked themselves for anyone. Tharn stared at the scene with his mouth hanging open. He did not understand what had happened. His mind could not process what he was seeing. The old female Velcorian pushed through the crowd and walked toward Sarah and the cubs. Her expression was unreadable as she looked at the mud-covered group. "Why did you do this?" she asked the cubs quietly. The small female cub stepped forward. Her voice was small but steady. "The human was kind to us. She shared food with us when she did not have to. She played with us when no one else would. She listened to us when everyone else told us to be silent. She treated us like we mattered." The old female turned to look at the adult Velcorians. Her golden eyes were hard. "This human showed more honor to our young than we have shown to her," she said loudly. "She gave kindness freely and received cruelty in return. Yet our cubs risked their lives to save her. What does that tell us about strength?" No one answered. Tharn looked at the ground and said nothing. The old female helped Sarah to her feet. She looked into the human's tired eyes and nodded slowly. "Perhaps we have been wrong about what makes someone strong," she said softly. "Perhaps true strength is not about muscles or fighting. Perhaps it is about the hearts we touch and the loyalty we inspire." Sarah smiled through the mud on her face. She looked at the cubs who had saved her and felt tears mix with the dirt on her cheeks. From that day forward, the Velcorians treated Sarah differently. She was no longer the weak human who needed to prove herself. She was the one who had earned the love of their children through simple kindness. And on Velcor Prime, there was no greater honor than that. The cubs had taught their elders a lesson that would change their society forever. Strength without compassion was just brutality, but kindness had the power to inspire courage even in the smallest hearts. Sarah stayed on Velcor Prime for 3 more years. She learned everything she could about their world and their people. But the most important lesson she learned came from the cubs who jumped into the mud to save her. Love and kindness were the strongest forces in the universe. They could cross any barrier and bridge any gap between species. When Sarah finally returned to Earth, she carried that lesson with her. She shared it with everyone who would listen. And slowly, the galaxy began to understand what humans had always known deep in their hearts. Kindness was never weakness. It was the greatest strength of all.